Thank you for listening to Liberty Christian Center's podcast. Let's join Pastor Paul Carlson for today's message.
All right, we got a new series beginning today. There it is. I've been wondering what it looked like, and this is it. So we're talking about intersection. And you might say, what do you mean intersection? Well, we mean intersection with God, intersection with heaven. I looked up the word intersection in the dictionary, and very simply put, it means this: when two roads or paths come together and meet. Two roads come together and meet. And so I was thinking about it, that if I've been walking down a road for a long time, it might not seem like there's any escape. It seems like things are always going to be the way they've been. But I'm telling you what, you come to an intersection and it opens up possibilities to go places you couldn't go before. Okay? So we're talking about intersection with God, intersection with heaven. And there's someone told me this years ago. It was Doug Jones. He's the president of Rhema Ministerial Association International. And he said this, that before he preaches, he always thinks about his message and tries to put it out in a tweetable form. And if you don't know what a tweetable form is, I've got to check up on what it is myself. It's 144 characters. It's 140. I was right at the beginning. Well, hey, snap, let's write that down. Hold on. Anyway, in any case, it's a very short little sentence that you use to express yourself. And if you're like most of us, you ask us what something's about, and we'll go on and on for paragraphs about what it's about. So it's a challenge to try to whittle it down and say, well, this is what I'm really trying to tell you. You want to know what I'm going to try to tell you today? How many want to know? There's three of you. Let's meet in the foyer. I'll tell you. No, what I want to tell you today is this, that God, our Heavenly Father, God, is eager to intersect your life. He's looking for opportunities to intersect with your life. You are important to Him. Sometimes we hear a thing like intersect with God, intersection, and we can pull the religious vibe on it all, like, oh, do you guys do this? Oh, you shake and everything in you shakes, and you go, oh, what do I got to do? I got to make myself ready to intersect. Well, it's good to have a good attitude about it, but it's more about realizing that God wants to intersect with you. He's longing to. He's looking for the opportunity. One of my favorite books on healing is F.F. Bosworth's Christ the Healer. And I won't go on about that, but he says this in, I think it's chapter 4. He says this: if the great Pacific Ocean were held over your head, there'd be such a mighty, power, a mighty power hanging over you. It would be looking for any way that it could break through and crack and gush all over your life. And I understand this because I've gone to some of these big, water sheds, aquarium, and places like that. And then sometimes, you get in there and you got all these fish and sharks and stuff behind the water, and all there is between you and them is a pane of glass, and it kind of creeps me out. I'm thinking, I hope they engineered this properly, because if there is any crack or crevice in this thing, it's going to gush all over me. But that's how God's power, that's how His love is for you. He's not like some people, that would keep the carrot out before the horse just far enough out there that he could never really reach it. You know what I'm talking about? You know how you have cat games, I've had cat games. I haven't played this one with our current cat, but I used to play a game with our old cat where we had a laser light. And you'd put it on the floor. I first became aware because the sun would reflect off my wristwatch, and I'd see it would drive the cat wild. Seeing the reflection of that light, it would go all over. It would even make its jaw do this wild thing where it kind of would vibrate up and down. It would go because he thought it was catching a bird. You guys have seen that before, And so I finally got to where, I wanted to play this game on the cat even when it was dark and the sun was down. So I got a laser light. And I'd do this laser light, and the cat would go, and look after it. And just the time it was going to pounce on it, I'd go, boop. I know. Can you believe I do that, Elijah? It's mean, isn't it? You've done it too. You and I are in the same group. But you know what? Here's a revelation. Take this home with you today. God is nicer than me and Elijah. God is nicer. He isn't playing that game with you. He's trying to get it to you. He's not trying to keep it from you. Okay? Praise the Lord. So that's what we're trying to get across. I guess I blew it. I went over 140 characters. But anyway, turn to John 3:16. John 3:16 is probably, a key of what I'm looking at today. And as you read that, I know it's a familiar verse to many people, but wipe the familiarity away from it and just try to look at it with fresh eyes and know this. There's a message in here to be heard. And the first thing it says is that God so loved the world. He didn't just love the world, He so loved the world. That means He's mad about you. He's wild about you. He's crazy about you. Before you were ever a Christian, before you ever came to Christ, He was still just bonkers about you. He so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever would believe in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. Then it goes on in verse 17, it says that God didn't send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through Him might be saved. God's intention for you is that you experience all that He has for you. All right? It means so much to Him. Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 8-ish. He said this, he says that if God didn't hold back His only Son, but put Him in the game for us, how will He not freely give us all things? It's like 8:32 or something like that, somewhere in that ballpark. I'm like a preacher with hand grenades. I just throw them out there. I'm close enough, it'll go off, That's right, yeah. Oof. Anyway, 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9. We're just building a little foundation here. We're talking about the character of God. We're talking about our perception of who God is. And what we're seeing is this, that God is for me. He's not against me. That God is trying to intersect with my life. He's looking for ways to show Himself strong. In 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9, the first part of the verse says this. It says that God's eyes, the eyes of the Lord, run to and fro throughout the whole earth. The whole earth. Does that include Menominee? It includes Menominee. It includes Boyceville. It includes Woodville. It includes Eau Claire. Every point in between, even from the other side of the border, even over to Minnesota. God's eyes are running to and fro. He's looking. What's He looking for? He's looking for someone He can show Himself strong on their behalf. Someone whose heart is for Him, not against Him. Someone who's open to an intersection with heaven. I say heaven, I mean God, because God has all of heaven at His disposal. And there's different ways that He can organize an intersection with your life. In fact, you want to know the way He uses most? He uses other people. He uses you and I to intersect with people. He fills you and I with His thoughts, His power, His love, and you go out and you intersect with people and it displays God to them. Thank God. I'm so glad someone intersected my life, that I had an experience with God. For me, I was just, out of high school and trying to figure out what in the world I was going to do in life. And I was working in this job and it was downtown Minneapolis. And I had this guy that God just fashioned for my life. Why? How did He do that? Because He never beat me over the head with the Bible. If someone would have come up to me every day and just said, you need to do this and you need to do that, I would have been repelled. I would have. But this guy just accepted me. He loved me, so to speak. Yeah, He did love me. I wouldn't have said it back then. I'd have said he was a little crazy, but He didn't get blown away by me. And I worked for the guy for 2 years. And in those 2 years, there was probably only 2 occasions that he ever really shared the gospel with me. And one day I walked into work, one of these times. I walked in. He called me the hippie because I had long hair and probably smelled like weed. And I came into work and he says, "So, hippie, what'd you do last night?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, Bill was his name. I said, Yeah, me, a couple of my friends, we got together, we did some drugs, we did that. I was just open with them. I didn't have to be somebody I wasn't. I told him all that, and you know what he said to me? Then I said to him, what'd you do, Bill? He says, well, me and my wife, we were at home, and we were praying for you and your friends. I looked at him I had a great poker face. I didn't show any emotion. I just said, oh, okay. I walked away from that, and I tell you what, those words just rung in my ears. I heard that. I went home at night, and I thought, wow, he's at home praying for me and my friends. And, time went by. I even quit that job, but when God, finally had gotten a hold of me in such a fashion, I called him up. I said, take me to church. Out of the blue, I called him up. I said, hey, Bill, hippie here. I said, what are you doing tonight? Nothing much. Me and my wife are praying. No, anyway. I said, can you take me to a church or something? And I mean, he was like me. He was poker face too. He said, sure. I'm sure inside he was going, yes, yes, yes. He takes me to a service. I don't even know what the guy preached. Honestly, I don't, because I had one intention. I knew at the end of the service they'd give some kind of a altar call. I rocketed right up to the front. I might have been one of the first ones up there. I was like, that was my whole intention. I was going to somehow have an intersection with God. But he used people. He used people to bring me to that point. He used people to bring me to him. I want to say this in talking about an intersection with God. As we talk about this morning and probably in the next few weeks, I don't know what Reverend Keith is going to preach. He'll be good. But don't make it your quest to have an experience. Okay? Don't let your intersection be an experience that you're going after, but let your intersection be God himself, because he is the experience. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying? You talk about these things. Oh, I want to have that. I do too. And there is a hunger that's right, but direct your hunger to the person of God. Okay, and let that be what motivates you and what drives you. All right, I've got some things I want to share here. One more verse, and then we'll go on into some stories here. But Psalm 86:5, the writer of the Psalm said it this way. He said, "For you, Lord, you're good. You're ready to forgive, and you're abundant in mercy to all those that call upon you." You, Lord, are good. You're ready to forgive, and you're abundant in mercy to all those that call upon you. That's who God is. He is on the edge of his seat, ready to show you goodness, mercy, and forgiveness. That's who he is, okay? He's not up there with the fly swatter waiting to zap you. He's ready to bless you. Chapter 20, verse 29. Matthew 20, verse 29. There's a story of someone having an intersection with Jesus here in Matthew 20. I mean, goodness, where do you even begin? All through his ministry, that's all that happened, is Jesus intersected people's lives. He intersected a fisherman, and I'll say this by Luke's words anyway, uneducated fisherman, and transformed him into a world changer. Okay? Jesus, time and time again, all through his life, he was intersecting people. Even when he was a young boy, he was intersecting the theologians and people of his day with his wisdom, showing them expressions of God. But in Matthew chapter 20, verse 29, it says, "Now, as they went out of Jericho, there was a great multitude that followed Jesus. And behold, two blind men were sitting by the road when they heard that Jesus was passing by." I mean, talk about a visual intersection. They're on the road and Jesus is passing by. Woo, baby. So it says, "And they cried out, saying, 'Lord, have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David.'" I want to tell you this. When you cry out to God, God hears you. God hears you voice. He hears the cry of faith. He hears the cry of your heart. And He's waiting to show Himself strong to you. So these two guys are sitting by the road and they're crying out to Jesus. And you know what happens if you're reading along here? Is they're crying out to the Lord. The people that are sitting by them, they're saying, hey, get a grip. Tone it down a few notches. Dudes, you're being obnoxious, slow. Just keep it to yourself. Now, we don't have people like that in this church. But sometimes in the world, people will do that to you. When you get going for God, you get going for Him, I tell you, man, you're just a little too exuberant, man. Just tone it down a bit. What are you going to do? You're going to run counterclockwise in the church next? What's going to happen? I remember one church we were in, a guy did a cartwheel down the middle aisle. It was impressive. I only wish I could do a cartwheel. I'm stuck at the somersault level, and that's only about once every 10 years. I can roll. That's what I can do. I can roll. Maybe. So the multitude around them warned these guys that they should be quiet. But you know what happened? You know what happens to people when they're at the end of their rope and they get a hold of the concept that I am calling out to heaven? People around them are trying to quiet them down, but you know what happens? They cried all the more. They cried even louder. They said, they set aside everything in the world. They put their eyes on Jesus. And they said, what you got is what I want. And so, I'll tell you, again, heaven hears this kind of stuff. And Jesus stood still and called them and said, what is it you want me to do? And they said to Him, Lord, that our eyes be opened. Man, there's just something to it. I'll tell you, when people have a want to, I'm telling you, nothing can hold them back. People had a want to get a hold of Jesus. People had a want to get a hold of what they needed from Him. And Jesus said, what do you need? Whatever it is, tell me right now. And it says that our eyes be opened. And in verse 34 is so beautiful. It says, Jesus had compassion and He touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight. And you know, that is tremendous. That's worth jumping up and down about. That's worth running counterclockwise right there. But what follows is even, to me, even greater. It says after that they followed Him. You see, you have an intersection with heaven. You have an intersection with Jesus. It'll get your needs met, but it can change your life from here on out if you let it. If you let it. Let me move on, because there's more. Wow. Matthew 9, I wanted to read that. Oh, goodness, I got all kinds of stuff to read. I already turned the page. Well, let me read this. Matthew chapter 9. Jesus is actually talking here. He encouraged people to pray for an intersection with heaven. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 36, Jesus is standing with His disciples, again looking at the multitudes. And He saw them, and He said, it says He was moved with compassion for them. And you're going to find that phraseology time and time again. When Jesus saw the multitudes, there was something in Him that just was moved and drew strength from within. It says He was moved with compassion. And it says, because they were weary and they were scattered like sheep having no shepherd. And He said to His disciples, He said, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And therefore, this is what He said to the disciples. He said, therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. So what Jesus instructed these guys to do is pray. Pray for these people that are lost. Pray for these people that are having no direction. Pray for these people that haven't had an intersection with heaven, with God, with Jesus. Pray for them, because God then is going to send people into the fields, and they're going to intersect with their life, and they're going to point them in that right direction. So what I'm telling you today is have faith in your prayers. Know that they do something. You know, parents, I tell you, who comes into being a parent fully equipped? I mean, at least in your own thinking, who does? I mean, goodness, I mean, God is equipping us. But I'm telling you what, don't ever underestimate the prayers of your parents. The prayers of parents are so powerful over their kids. I have a brother. I have two brothers. One of them is 10 years older than I. And I'll just say this, growing up, it was great to have an older brother. He was tough, he was mean, he ran in gangs, and nobody messed with me. I always had friends like this, But my brother, he grew up like I did in a Christian home, and he had an example set before him, but really both of us ran. But he just ran longer than I did. He was messed up in some different things, alcohol and stuff kind of messed up his life. But, I mean, nice guy. I don't know, some of you have met my brother Robert, but he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Likable guy. I tell you, he is hilarious. He makes me laugh every time I talk to him. But for years, he ran from God. For years, you'd be talking with him, and you bring up church, you bring up Jesus, you bring up, godly stuff, and it would shut him down. Well, my parents, they prayed for him since the time he was born, and my brother turned 50, and it was in the year that he turned 50, and it was on Father's Day, and he had an experience. He had an intersection with heaven. I'm sitting at home, and he calls every week. Every week I talk to him on the phone. He lives in Louisiana now, but. My sister was talking to me, and she says, "Have you talked to Robert today?" And I said, No, I haven't. She says, "Well, when he calls you, you be sitting down." I said, "Really?" And just as I'm sitting there talking to her, caller ID, the phone's ringing, and I said, "Well, you know what? He's trying to call me right now." She says, "Well, hang up with me and talk to him." So I sit there and I talk to him, and lo and behold, he starts telling me about him and his wife had gone to church. And I'm like, "Really? This has never happened. He's never gone to church." And he starts telling me, he says, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my brother has become the most learned Christian guy I'd ever come across. And he doesn't talk to me like, "Well, I just had this intersection with God." He doesn't say that, of course. He doesn't say, "Well, I've come to the place where I received salvation." He doesn't say any of those Christianese words. He just starts talking to me like he's all of a sudden been the authority on Christendom since birth. And what he tells me is, yeah, we went to church today. It was good. It was really good. I'm going to go back. So I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, really?" And he goes, yeah. Someone spoke in tongues during the service. I had to take Kathy aside and tell her what that was all about. His wife, Yeah, she didn't know about that. But I told her, I set her straight. I said, "Well, that's really good, Rob." I didn't want to blow his cover or anything, but I sat and listened to him. And then I think weeks went by, conversations went by, and I finally says, "Man, you are the funniest guy around." I said, "You had an experience with God back then, didn't you?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, I did. This is like a month later. And I'll tell you, 10 years have come and gone, and he's on fire for God. He's on fire for God. Why do you tell me that, Pastor? Because don't give up on your prayers. 50 years old. My parents were thinking he'd get born again when he was 20 at least, like I did. 50 years goes by. Dana has an uncle. How old was Uncle Harvey? He was in his 80s. Passed away on a Friday. Got born again on Sunday before. Grandma Peterson, Dana's grandma, and of whom I'm one of the favorites too. I was one of Grandma Peterson's favorites. Sorry if anybody's listening. But she went to the grave believing for her kids. I'm going to venture a guess. I think Harvey was 89. I could be wrong, but he was in his 80s for sure. 89. Gets born again on Sunday, goes home on Friday. Is that wild? Don't give up. Your prayers make intersections possible. Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, I'm not going to read this. Many of you know this story. It's one of my favorites. Cornelius was a Gentile. Okay? You say, what's a Gentile? Well, a Gentile is anybody that's not a Jew. And in the day that Cornelius lived, the primary focus of the gospel was to the Jewish people. It wasn't that God didn't love the Gentiles, but the church, you could say this, they hadn't come to that revelation. Okay? And Cornelius was a just man, and he had a heart for God. And heaven saw the heart that he had for God. And an angel came into Cornelius' life and said, listen, Cornelius, send a Joppa for this guy named Peter. He's going to come and he's going to tell you words whereby you can have a relationship with God. I mean, did this excite Cornelius? I'm telling you what, it set him ablaze. So he sent people immediately to this town called Joppa. And he sent for Simon Peter, who was there. And they went to get Peter and bring him back to Cornelius' house. And you know, I say this, you know, you ever feel like you're an outsider? You ever feel like you don't fit in with the cool group? You know, you ever feel like you're in high school and you didn't get to sit at the cool table? Cornelius had every right to feel that way. He didn't fit the mold. He didn't fit the groove. He wasn't part of the clique. He was a Gentile, but God heard his cry. God saw his heart. And he sent to Joppa to get Peter to come and tell him these words by which he could be saved. And by the time Peter got there, the hunger and the zeal that Cornelius had caused him to go out and gather all his friends, his close friends, and his relatives, and he had them all in one place, ready, expecting, waiting to hear these words that would be brought forth that would change his life. There was such anticipation and such hunger in the room that when Peter was preaching to the group, they couldn't even wait for Peter to finish his sermon. They all just received an intersection from heaven, and they all started praying in tongues. And Peter's the guy preaching. He's looking at him saying, wow, what's going on here? What's happening? Just like we did in the beginning. Just like it happened for us in Acts chapter 2. He says these guys are Gentiles, and they're having an intersection with heaven. Your hunger can affect your intersection. But I'll tell you this, God is looking for ways to connect with you. Hebrews chapter 11, I want to just go for one more story here. Another one of my favorite. Do you have favorite Bible characters? Well, just like ice cream, I don't just have one, I have many. I have many favorite flavors, people, yeah. Hebrews 11, if you don't know this, Hebrews 11 is the Hall of Faith. Not the Hall of Fame, but the Hall of Faith. And if you read it, you'll understand why I say that. Because from beginning to end, Hebrews 11 talks about men and women who believed God and were mightily used by God, even though they were, sometimes weak people, sometimes they were frail people, sometimes they weren't the people you would have expected God to choose to use. But God used them, and they all had this in common, is that they connected their faith with God. And they did miraculous things. So towards the end of the chapter, he says this, the writer says this, he says, what more shall I say in verse 32? He says, for what time would fail to tell you of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. Saying some of these names takes faith. And also David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, and stopped the mouths of lions. Do you ever feel like there's some lions' mouths that need to be stopped in your life? Well, faith did it for these guys. Faith will do it for you. But the first one that he mentions here is a man named Gideon. And I connect Gideon with some of these things he said. He subdued kingdoms, he worked righteousness, and he received and obtained the promises. Well, Gideon, most people know him, from the Bible that's in the hotel room, sitting next to the bed. That's what most people know. But Gideon was an actual man that lived here, and he probably wasn't the first person you'd think of that God would choose to shake a kingdom. Gideon, is known because in the Bible context, he's known that he pursued and conquered the opposing forces and brought freedom to his people. Okay? And he did it with not a huge army, but he did it with 300 men. Okay? This is what Gideon's kind of known for. Gideon's also known for this, that when God connected with him and talked to him, there was some doubt, there was some speculation with Gideon, and what he asked God to do was to, he took a fleece and he put it out. He says, if it's really you, Lord, in the morning, let the dew be all around it, but let it be dry. And if that's what happens, then I'm going to know that's you talking to me. People are real. I love that about the Bible. People are just real. Okay? It isn't like, a lightning bolt came from heaven and they're like, I'm ready to take on the world. No, they had doubts just like every other human being might have. God still used them. So, then he did the opposite thing the next day. He says, well, let the fleece be wet and all the ground be dry. And God did that too. And he confirmed his word to Gideon. He built a foundation in Gideon where Gideon could go out and stand and be the man of God that God called him to be. All right, let me go back to the Word. In Judges chapter 6, you'll find the story of Gideon in Judges 6, 7, and 8. And I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'm going to read a little portion from chapter 6. I'm going to read this out of the Message Bible, because it was just a real readable version. But it says, yet again, the people of Israel went back to doing evil in God's sight. And God put them under the domination of Midian for 7 years. Midian overpowered Israel. Okay, did you get this? So for 7 years, Israel had been under the domination of these people that were called the Midians. Okay? And, I wish it wasn't this way, but you'll find all through history, there's been people groups that rise up against other people groups. I do my best not to look at people in a group because that'll mess you up. People are individuals, okay? Don't put them in the stereotype that they're in some group, okay? You and I are individuals. Who are they? They're from Menominee? Oh. Wisconsin, huh? Yeah, all right. No, we're individuals. But here's what I wanted to say to you, is that the people of Israel were not living a subdued life because it was God's will. Okay? God didn't choose to go away from them. They chose to go away from God. And when they chose to turn from God, they found themselves in this place of oppression. Okay? Now, years ago, Rob and Liz Hunt were the youth leaders here at Liberty. And right now, Rob and Liz Hunt are beginning a ministry. They're going to be doing the marriage retreat this year, and they're actually taking the team to Israel in June. And God's doing different things in their life. But back then, they were the youth leaders. They did a great job. And just like our youth today are going off on an adventure, when Rob and Liz were the youth leaders, the youth would go on adventures. And one, I think it was a Saturday night, Liz had a car full of youth, and they were heading, I think they were heading to 3 Degrees to have a concert or something in the cities. And so Liz is driving down 94, and she takes a turn off of 94. And before long, she realizes that she is in a place that she shouldn't be. And so it was in the days of cell phones, so Liz called me up and said, I think I took a wrong turn. I think I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. And I said, well, like any of my kids getting lost, I would ask them questions like, what do you see around you? And Liz started reading off some street signs, and I realized she was in my old neighborhood. Can I tell you about my old neighborhood? Don't go in my old neighborhood, probably ever, but definitely don't go in my old neighborhood after dark. Okay? It's just wisdom. Only go in my old neighborhood if you're going, like I did last summer with Pastor Nick Kinn, to go preach the gospel. And we saw people get saved. I said, cool. Nick, he was just messing with me. He took me to my neighborhood because he just wanted me to experience life. So So Liz begins describing a park and some roads that she was on, and I tried not to show concern in my voice, but I said, Liz, this is what you need to do. You need to completely turn around and go the opposite way that you're going right now. When you get to 94, head towards downtown. Take a right. Follow it down to the city, and you'll be okay. You see, wherever you're at in life, you're there because you made a choice. God didn't necessarily destine you to be in that place. He might have had other places He wanted you to be. But He's given us this power. It's called choice. It's a cool thing, but some people, and all of us have used it wrongly before, because nobody's perfect, okay? And it can devastate you. It can put you in places. And the problem is that a lot of times when people get in this wrong place, the simple answer was you just turn around and you walk out of it. But the problem is sometimes people get in that wrong place and they decide to live there. And then upon that decision, they've built a tent and they're living there. Then their mind becomes consumed with this place, and they begin to turn from God, and they begin to blame God for the place that they're in, thinking that He called them there and He put this on them. And God gets a bad rap when the whole thing was in their power to choose. So it was really simple with Liz. I said, Liz, my kids are in that car. They're not going to camp there. I came from that place. And unless God called me, I'm not going to be there again. Okay? So I said, you turn them around. You turn around. The next opportunity you have, you go around the block, you do whatever you need to do. But then you go off and you get back to 94 and you go west. Go west, young lady. Okay? And she ended up great. They made it to the show. They had a good time. Simple stuff. Simple stuff. All right, so anyway, reading on in Judges 6 here, I'm going to just read some more. Because of Midian, the people of Israel made themselves hideouts in the mountains, in the caves, and the forts. And when Israel planted its crops, Midian, and they got some partners in it, Amalek, the Easterners, they'd come and invade them, invade their camps and their fields and destroy their crops all the way down to Gaza. And they left nothing for them to live on, neither sheep or ox or donkey. They brought in the cattle and the tents and came in and they took over like an invasion of locusts, and their camels, they were past counting, and they marched in and devastated the country. So the people of Israel were reduced to grinding poverty by the Midianites. And at this point in their life, see, they did the right thing. Some people, they camp there and they pitch a tent and they blame God, but other people will turn to God. And to the children of Israel's credit, they turned to God and they cried out to God. And you know, desperation will do that to people. But it says that one time, in verse 7, it goes on, it says, one time when the people of Israel cried out to God because of Midian, God sent a prophet to them with a message. And the prophet came and told them, you know, things like, man, I've never left you, I've never forsaken you. You know, what I did for the children coming out of Egypt, I'll do for you. And, you know, I think that because of the hardness that was still there, they heard those things and they said, yeah, if that's really so, why are we here? Because people fail to take responsibility for their own choices. Man, I thought you were nice. I told you I'm not as nice as God. Or Elijah either, so hey, we're cool. But it's just the truth, and we need to know it. So it goes on down here and around verse 10. He says, I said, I'm your God. Don't for a minute be afraid of the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living, but you didn't listen to me. Then in verse 11 it says, one day the angel of God came and sat down under the oak in Oprah that belonged to Joash and the Abiezrite. Clarification here, it's not Oprah Winfrey. But anyway, for the record, just wanted you to know. Whose son's Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress out of the sight of the Midianites. And the angel of God appeared to him and said, God is with you, O mighty warrior. Isn't that amazing what God does? He goes down there in this downtrodden state where Gideon is, you know, what is he, living in a cave? He's reduced to a caveman. And his food is being eaten by the enemy. His animal's been driven out. He's impoverished. And God comes down there and says, oh, mighty man of God, mighty man of valor. And Gideon's sitting there going, who's he talking to? Who's he talking to? But you see, the thing that I get it is this, is that God sees you and I even right now in the situations that we're in, and He sees beyond that. He sees what He's called you to. You right now, in the eyes of heaven, are a champion waiting to go out and happen. Wow, I love that. I love that about God. So Gideon's skeptical. In verse 13, Gideon replies, "With me, my master, if God is with me, why has all this happened to us?" Again, isn't that a thought people have? Then he goes on, he says, "Where are all the miracle wonders our parents and grandparents told us about, telling us, didn't God deliver us from Egypt? The fact is, God has nothing to do with us. He's turned us over to Midian." So here's the thing I wanted to tell you is this, that you need your own intersection with God. I'm thankful for godly parents, for godly grandparents, but there's a trap that people can fall into, and this is it. You can't rely on what happened to your parents and grandparents. Even though what they had was real, even though what they saw was outstanding, you need your own experience with God. You need Him to show Himself strong to you. Dana and I saw this when our kids were young. You know, growing up as, PKs, pastors' kids, there's this trap that they could fall into in that God is my parents' thing. And what Dana and I would pray for them from the time they were little, probably around 4 or 5, we started praying, "Lord, we pray that our kids will experience you the way we experienced you." It's important. Again, I've said this already. Don't underestimate prayers of a parent. Don't underestimate any prayers you make. When my dad was praying for me, when I was running from God, I called him up on the phone. I said, "Dad, I got a favor." He says, "What's that, Paul?" I said, "Would you please quit praying for me?" That'll show you what prayers will do. And I had a list. I said, "Dad, call Uncle Carl, call Aunt Norty." I said, "You tell them, quit praying for me." But I was so naive that I didn't realize that was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. And instead of stop praying, they amped it up. And it wasn't long before I was at the end of my natural rope saying, "Lord, deliver me, help me, help me. Bill, come and get the hippie, bring him to church, come on." All right, so you need your own experience. You need your own intersection with Him. Verse 14, God faced him directly, said, "Go in the strength that's yours. Save Israel from Midian. Haven't I just sent you?" Gideon said to him, "Me, my master, how and with what could I ever save Israel? Look at me." This is Gideon talking. He says, "My clan is the weakest in Manasseh." And get this, my favorite, "and I'm the runt of the litter." You ever feel like you're the runt of the litter? Gideon felt like that. He felt like my clan is the worst. I'm from the wrong side of the tracks, and I'm the least of the least. But God saw him as a mighty champion. The thing is that when you have an encounter, when you have an intersection with God, it's important that you adapt God's thinking about yourself and about your situation. It's important because it is your ticket out. It's your ticket out. God says, "Hey, follow me. Turn around and come my way. I'm leading you to a place that is better than this." Just drop your stuff and go.
Thank you for listening to Liberty Christian Center's podcast. To partner with this ministry or for any additional information, please visit libertychristiancenter.org.